Hi everyone. So this video is just going to be about basically me just talking about all of the books I read in 2023. I have made a PowerPoint which I've got currently on my laptop so that I kind of don't ramble because I know that's going to happen and it will probably happen anyway. Anyway, let's just get started. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions about any of the books and if I could answer them, then let me know below. Okay, so the first book I read this year was We Just Clicked by Annabelle. This is a rom-com. So Izzy decides to fake date her co-worker Luke so that both of them can boost their Instagram following. But when Izzy meets Aiden, she begins to question her priorities. There were lots of moments in this book that I actually quite disliked because they really did make me cringe. However, there were also sweet and funny parts that I loved. It did feel quite repetitive at times, like the same kind of routine. Working on her Instagram stuff, then actually going to work, going to the cinema, just kind of like on repeat. In terms of characters, I really despised Luke, and I think that's kind of what Annabelle was intending when she wrote the character. I loved Aiden, and I also really appreciated Izzy's friends, and I felt like they had a good influence on her most of the time. Izzy's the kind of character who you kind of feel so many different emotions for, but you ultimately do end up loving her. The ending was also satisfying. I just love a satisfying ending at the end of a romance book. I do give this one 3 stars. Okay, the next book is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. This book contains potentially triggering themes of domestic violence and homelessness, so if you think this could be something that is likely to upset you, I would do some further research into it before you decide to take on the book. So the premise of this book is that Lily meets Ryle on a rooftop, and their sudden spark brings on a romance that seems too good to be true. Lily begins to question her relationship with Ryle as she finds things out about him that are quite disturbing and overwhelming. And her thoughts turn to Atlas Corrigan, her first love and a link to a past that she thought she had left behind. But the reappearance of Atlas threatens everything Lily has with Ryle. My favourite part of this book were probably Atlas and Alyssa for their positive influences and impact on Lily's life. This book was written in a way that kind of enabled me to really feel what Lily did as she navigated her abusive relationship. And it is so much more than what people consider to be just a romance novel, because I've seen it online and on the internet being called a romance novel, but I think it is a lot more complex than that. I do give it 4 stars. When I was 10, my mother got me a subscription to a website called Seeds Anonymous, I said. Every month I would get an unmarked package of seeds in the mail with instructions on how to plant them and care for them. I wouldn't know what I was growing until it came up out of the ground. Every day after school, I'd run straight to the backyard to see the progress. It gave me something to look forward to. Growing things felt like a reward. I could feel Atlas staring at me when he asked, "A reward for what?" I shrugged. "For loving my plants the right way. Plants reward you based on the amount of love you show them. If you're cruel to them or neglect them, they give you nothing. But if you care for them and love them the right way, they reward you with gifts in the form of vegetables or fruits or flowers." I looked down at the weed I was tearing apart in my hands, and there was barely an inch left of it. I wadded it up between my fingers and flicked it. The next book I have is Shadow by Michael Morpurgo. So this book is about a man, and when a man finds himself most needing a friend, Shadow appears in the mouth of his Afghan cave. Named after the very quality, Shadow is a constant companion, always beside a man as he and his mother find the courage to leave their cave for the border, desperate now for the chance of safety. The further they walk, the more they wonder if anywhere is truly safe. This book is really quite emotional. Reading about a man's tragic journey to England was really difficult. It's a heartbreaking and shocking story, but I valued the wholesome moments amongst the grief and war. The story is essentially split into 2 parts, the journey to England and what happens when they get there. It was a really moving story and a book I think everyone should read. I gave it 4.5 stars. I was running and running, waving at the soldiers to warn them, screaming and yelling at them that there was a bomb, pointing to where it was, to where Shadow was. All the soldiers had stopped by now and were crouching down, taking aim at me. And at that moment, the whole world seemed to be standing still. I remember one of the soldiers standing up and shouting at me to stop where I was. I didn't understand any English then, of course, but he was making it quite clear what he wanted me to do. He was telling me to move back and to do it fast. So I did. I backed away till I found Mother's arms around me, holding me. She was sobbing with terror, and it was only then that I began to be frightened myself, to realize at all how much danger we were in. The soldier was walking now towards Shadow, calling out one word over and over again, but not to us, to Shadow. Oh my goodness, I love this book, A Quiet Kind of Thunder by Sarah Barnard. So this book is about Steffi, she doesn't talk, and Reese, who can hear. They both understand each other perfectly though. As Steffi struggles with her anxiety, being tasked with introducing the new pupil Reese to her school isn't the best news she's received all day. But as she begins to enjoy his company and they spend more and more time together, maybe their relationship could bring great things to the both of them. I found Steffi's feelings in this book concerning her anxiety to be very real and relatable. I loved her friendship with Tan and the relationship that blossomed between Steffi and Reese. The language and writing of this book is beautiful. I liked that the conflict in the story wasn't all about boys and petty drama, and that it was never dragged out. Overall, I loved the story and the characters, so much so that I just wish the book was longer. I give this book 4.5 stars. I stopped listening, my eyes sliding back to Reese, who is watching Mr. Stafford's face intently as he speaks. Every time Mr. Stafford turns his head or moves out of Reese's eye line, I see him tense. It makes me want to run up to the front of the crowd and grab Mr. Stafford so I can yell, "Just keep your head still! Can't you see he's trying to read?" But my name is Steffi Bronze and I don't speak, let alone yell. I move slowly so people won't notice I'm there, because running in public is as loud as a shout. I like to wear jumpers with long sleeves that go right down over my wrists and hands and fingers. Meekness is my camouflage. Silence is my force field. So I don't. Okay, this year I read Heroes of Olympus. This is kind of like the sequel series to Percy Jackson and the Olympians. It follows the same characters in the same universe, but also we have a lot of new characters introduced, and I love that part about it. So in the first book, The Lost Hero, we follow 3 new heroes, Piper, Leo and Jason, and they are all demigods. There are also talks in this book about a missing demigod and a curse that threatens to destroy everyone and everything. I give this book 5 stars. I loved it. Book 2 in this series is called The Son of Neptune. There is the return of a familiar face, and we are also introduced to the Roman demigods and the place where they all live, New Rome. I give this book 5 stars. The third book in this series is The Mark of Athena. This book follows the quest for a wise girl, and it contains a huge cliffhanger. I gave this book 4.5 stars. My copy of The House of Hades is really quite battered, like there's pages falling out of it. But anyway, The House of Hades follows a trip through Tartarus, and oh my gosh, I love this book. We also get to see more of beloved characters such as Nico D'Angelo. I gave this book 5 stars. The last book in the series, The Blood of Olympus, documents the fulfilling of the prophecy that we have been following from the very beginning. I gave this book 4 stars. It was a good ending, but I didn't love it. I'll just say that. But I still really love the book. This is, in general, such a brilliant series, and it has so many unforgettable moments, lovable characters, and it's so emotional and intense. It's great meeting new characters in the Riodenverse, and new realms of the ancient Greek and Roman worlds, seeing new gods and goddesses and mythical creatures. I loved the multi-POVs. I know not everyone does, but to me it was great being able to see my favourite characters from different people's perspectives and also get new perspectives. The ending was somewhat disappointing, as I said, but it becomes more satisfying if you read Rick's next ancient Greek Olympian series, The Trials of Apollo. Here is an extract from Book 1, The Lost Hero. Jason was a little disappointed. He would have appreciated having somebody on the trip who knew what they were doing, so he wouldn't feel like he was leading Piper and Leo off a cliff. "Hey, you'll do fine," Annabeth promised. "Something tells me this isn't your first quest." Jason had a vague suspicion she was right, but that didn't make him feel any better. Everyone seemed to think he was so brave and confident, but they didn't see how lost he really felt. How could they trust him when he didn't even know who he was? The next book I read was The Love Square by Laura Jane Williams. So this book is about Penny Bridge, who believes she has always been unlucky in love. But that seems to change when she steps into a new life in a new town and meets a man, and then another and another. And all of them want to date her, but she just has to decide if any of them are the one. This book was actually really entertaining. I loved the characters and appreciated that they all had flaws, which made them seem so much more real. I really also enjoyed the sisterly bond between Penny and Clementine. It's an easy read, and the writing wasn't amazing, but the storyline was good. And I enjoyed the closure that we got in the epilogue. This book does have discussions of cancer, so that is just a trigger warning for anyone who it might affect. In the end, I gave this book 4 stars. I read The Hunger Games in 2023. The Hunger Games is about 12 boys and 12 girls who are forced to compete in a live TV show called The Hunger Games, but only one of them will come out alive. When Katniss volunteers herself in the place of her younger sister, she sees it as her death sentence. But for Katniss, survival is second nature. So this was a reread. Suzanne Collins so clearly puts so much time and thought into her novels, and it really pays off. She's created a world that is terrifying and yet so possible, and it is definitely a warning to society. I love the character of Katniss and her kindness towards Prim and Rue and all those who are innocent. The book is heartbreaking and engaging, and the alliance that forms between Katniss and Peter, the boy from her district, is key to this story being so good. I recommend you read the other 2 books in this trilogy, Catching Fire and Mockingjay, to see how Katniss's relationships with people change and develop, and how she stuns all of Panem. I gave this book 5 stars. Somewhere far away, I can hear the crowd murmuring unhappily, as they always do when a 12-year-old gets chosen, because no one thinks this is fair. And then I see her, the blood drained from her face, hands clenched in fists at her sides, walking with stiff, small steps up towards the stage, passing me, and I see the back of her blouse has become untucked and hangs out over her skirt. It's this detail, the untucked blouse forming a duck's tail, that brings me back to myself. Prim! The strangled cry comes out of my throat, and my muscles begin to move again. Prim! I don't need to shove through the crowd. The other kids make way immediately, allowing me a straight path to the stage. I reach her just as she is about to mount the steps. With one sweep of my arm, I push her behind me. I volunteer! I gasp. I volunteer as tribute! The next book I read was Playlist for the Dead by Michelle Volkov. I'm just going to put it straight out there that this book does talk of suicide. If you don't want to hear about it, please do skip forwards. I'll put the timestamp on the screen. After a fight at a party, Sam's best friend Hayden kills himself, and all he leaves for Sam is a playlist of songs and a suicide note. As Sam listens to these songs, he tries to understand why his best friend killed himself, but only when he takes out his earbuds and focuses on the world around him will he be able to piece together Hayden's story, and maybe have a chance to change his own. I really liked Sam as a character, but Astrid, the potential love interest, I'd guess you say, felt really shallow and poorly designed. The ending was not satisfying, and the book seemed to focus less on Hayden and Sam, which would have been an interesting topic, and more on Astrid and her relationship with Sam, and the so-called bully trifecta, which, while important, seemed to take away from the story due to them being so heavily discussed and dragged out storylines. In the end, I gave this book 2.5 stars. Okay, so next I read the Trials of Apollo series by Rick Riordan. This is the series that I mentioned you should read after reading The Heroes of Olympus. So as before, I'll talk about each book individually without giving any spoilers, and then talk about the series as a whole. The first book in this series is called The Hidden Oracle. After Apollo, now a 16-year-old mortal, and young demigod Meg receive a lift to Camp Half-Blood from Percy Jackson, they are given a task: to protect the final oracle and stop the beast from taking control. I really love these new characters, and Apollo is hilarious as a teenage boy, and I loved seeing more of his cabin. In the end, I gave this book 4.5 stars. In The Dark Prophecy, the second book in the Trials of Apollo, Apollo is accompanied by a demigod whom you may have seen before, and a former immortal sorceress, on his quest to take down another evil Roman emperor. I gave this book 3 stars. The third book of the series, The Burning Maze, follows Apollo, Meg, and 2 familiar faces as they unite for another trial. This book contains a trip through a burning maze to free an oracle and defeat a third bloodthirsty Roman emperor. I gave this book 4.5 stars. It was packed with action, and I loved that. The fourth book, The Tyrant's Tomb, follows Apollo as he has to save Camp Jupiter from being destroyed by 3 evil Roman emperors. But he cannot do it alone, especially when the last king of Rome shows up. This book got 5 stars, my favourite so far of the series. The last book in the series is called The Tower of Nero. Apollo and Meg get ready for their final trial. They go back to Manhattan, where they must face the Emperor Nero for another time, and take him down once and for all. I also gave this book 5 stars. It was a brilliant, action-packed ending. I mean, I think you can tell how much I love these books based off of how broken the spines are alone. I had to get them right up to my face so I could really get myself into them. The series is super entertaining, and Apollo as a teenage boy is definitely a perspective you would want to read from. You should just read these books for the haikus at the beginning of each chapter alone. When it comes to humour, friendships and quests, Rick Riordan definitely knows what he is doing. It's also great to see such familiar faces, and meet new ones too. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This classic follows Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet. Mr. Darcy is unmoved by Elizabeth's vivacity, beauty and wit upon their first meeting, and his aloof superiority is certainly matched by Elizabeth's cool disdain. Darcy is the last man in the world Elizabeth could be prevailed upon to marry, but Elizabeth is compelled to realize that hasty first impressions are not always the truest. This book is often called the original enemies to lovers. Jane Austen has such a way with words. It is fascinating to watch the relationships between characters change and develop. I love the sisterhood between Elizabeth and Jane, and Elizabeth's bond with her father, and of course her complex relationship with Mr. Darcy. I only wish there could have been more description of their feelings and time spent together. In the end, I gave this book 4 stars. Next up is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. Oh my goodness me, I loved this book. It was absolutely wild. So this book is set at a boarding school on an island where strange things are happening. First it was the teachers dying one by one. Then the tox started to infect the students, turning their bodies strange. Left to fend for themselves, the girls don't pass the school's fence, not when the tox has claimed the woods. All they can do is survive and hope for a cure. But when Hetty's best friend Bayet goes missing, she will do anything she can to find her, even if it means breaking quarantine and leaving school grounds. But on her search, Hetty will learn there is more to their story, the tox and life it wrecks to school for girls. This book gripped me. Oh my goodness, it messed with my mind in the best way. The tox is super fascinating and I love how gory it is. The relationships between the girls and the teachers is also super interesting, particularly how quickly they change from being united to every woman for herself. I gave this book 4 stars in the end. The boat girls come banging through the front doors, letting their bags drop, and there's a scramble for the food. They send us cans mostly, and sometimes packs of dried jerky. Barely ever anything fresh, never enough for everyone. And on an average day, meals are just Welch in the kitchen, unlocking the storage closet and parceling out the smallest rations you ever saw. But today's a delivery day. New supplies come home on the backs of the boat shift girls, and that means Welch and Headmistress keep their hands clean and let us fight for one thing each. Bayet and me, though, we don't have to fight. Reese is right by the door, and she drags a bag off to the side for us. If it was somebody else, people would mind, but it's Reese. Left hand with its sharp, scaled fingers, so everyone keeps quiet. She was one of the last to get sick. I thought maybe it had missed her, maybe she was safe. And then they started. The scales, each a shifting sort of silver, unfolding out of her skin like they were coming from inside. The same thing happened to one of the other girls in our year. They spread across her whole body and turned her blood cold until she wouldn't wake up. So we thought it was the end for Reese. And they took her upstairs, waited for it to kill her. But it didn't. One day she's holed up in the infirmary, and the next she's back again. Her left hand a wild thing, but still hers. So this year I also read Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy by Holly Jackson. As a content warning, these books contain themes of rape, sexual assault, substance abuse and murder. I would do further research into each book if you believe that these might be triggering to you before you decide to read it. So a brief synopsis on the first book of the story, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. 5 years ago, schoolgirl Auntie Belle was murdered by Sal Singh, and the police know he did it. Everyone in Little Kilton knows he did it. But Pip doesn't believe it, and suspecting something is wrong with the conclusion of the tragic case, she decides she will uncover the truth. But not everyone in Little Kilton is happy about this, especially those with secrets to hide. I gave this book 5 stars. Good Girl, Bad Blood is the second book in this trilogy. When Pip's best friend's brother goes missing, and nobody seems to want to do anything about it, it becomes Pip's job to solve the mystery of his disappearance. But this time the case isn't closed. It's wide open, and she has to find the answers before time runs out. I also gave this book 5 stars. I loved it. The last book in this trilogy is As Good as Dead. The result of her previous investigation still haunts Pip, but it's not long until a new case finds her, and this time it's all about herself. It doesn't take long for her to discover a connection between her stalker and a local serial killer, but the police once again refuse to act. Now Pip must find the answers before it's too late. Originally I gave this book 2.5 stars, but upon reflection I give it 4 stars. I was really just quite grumpy about the ending, on a purely sympathetic level for Pip. Holly Jackson is brilliant at keeping you gripped and on the edge of your seat. I flew through all 3 of these books. Pip and Ravi are 2 of my favourite characters and I just love their relationship. All of these books are emotional, anxious reads and they pack a great punch. I definitely recommend them. Next, I read the Hush Hush series by Becca Fitzpatrick. So Hush Hush is the first book in this series. This book is about Nora Gray. She's never been interested in romance until she meets Patch. Nora is drawn to him against her better judgment, but she's not sure she can trust him. Patch seems to be everywhere she is and to know more about her than her closest friends. When she tries to seek answers, she discovers she's in the middle of a centuries-old battle between the immortal and the fallen. I gave this book 4 stars. Crescendo is the second book in the Hush Hush series. After falling in love with a fallen angel, Nora should know better than to expect her life to return to normal. After all, as much as she might not be aware of it, normal doesn't run in her family. I gave this book 4 stars. Silence is the third book in this series. Secrets of Patch's past have been overcome. 2 irreconcilable worlds have been bridged. But now, armed with nothing but their faith in one another, Patch and Nora enter a fight to stop a villain who has the power to threaten everything they've worked for. I gave this book 5 stars. And then the finale of this series. Finale. Nora is more certain than ever of her love for Patch, the fallen angel. The 2 of them must gather their strength to face one last trial. I gave this book 4.5 stars. This series felt quite similar to the Twilight Saga by Stephanie Meyer, but the story itself was certainly different. While the writing isn't brilliant, I did thoroughly enjoy the books in this series. They're all entertaining, and the history of the fallen and the immortals and the different rivals is also interesting. The romance between Patch and Nora was also pretty good, although it is a immortal and high schooler romance trope, so do with that information what you will. That being said, I certainly cared about them both, and also other characters introduced later on in the series. Next up, I read The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro. Demigods Nico D'Angelo and Will Solis follow a prophecy that leads them into the depths of hell in order to rescue an old friend. Together they hope facing every obstacle and enemy will be easier. But can their bond survive Tartarus? And will they make it out alive? I absolutely loved this book. Will and Nico are 2 of my favourite Riordanverse characters. This book is so special and I value it deeply. It was angsty but heartwarming and just so perfect. The ending was brilliant. I loved the humour and the vulnerable moments in this book. I am constantly impressed by Rick's ability to get every element of a book right, and I really think having Mark Oshiro write with him really brought so much more heart to this book. I gave it 5 stars. After an uneventful ride south on the 6 train, Nico and Will made their way to the southernmost edge of Central Park. Some of the leaves on the trees were beginning to turn yellow, and a light breeze rustled them. Joggers and cyclists zipped along the main road as Nico guided Will toward the woodland. When Nico stopped in front of a large grouping of boulders made up of Manhattan schist, Will raised an eyebrow. "Where do we go next?" he asked. Nico pointed at the rocks. "Through there?" Will regarded the giant grey slabs. "Am I missing something?" "Nico, they're just rocks. What are we supposed to do?" "Oh, I am not doing anything," said Nico proudly. "I need you to sing." Will looked around him. "Is this a prank? Did you and Mr. D come up with this? Are there hidden cameras?" "I'm honoured that you think I'm capable of orchestrating a prophecy to pull off such a thing, but no, this isn't a joke. This is the literal door of Orpheus." "Oh," said Will. Then, "Oh, so it's—" Nico nodded. "One of the only remaining secret entrances into the underworld." Next, I read I Am Malala, written by Malala Yousafzai with Christina Lamb. This tells the story of the life of Malala, an advocate for women's education rights, before the day she was shot in the head at point-blank range on Tuesday 9th of October 2012, and what happened after that. This is a tale of family uprooted by global terrorism, the fight for girls' education, and of Malala's parents' fierce love for their daughter, in a society that prizes sons. It makes you believe in the power one voice has to change the world. There is so much to take away from this book, and it was written really well. I gave it 5 stars. As we got older, girls would be expected to stay inside. We'd be expected to cook and serve our brothers and fathers, while boys and men could roam freely about town. My mother and I could not go out without a male relative to accompany us, even if it was a 5-year-old boy. This was the tradition. I had decided very early I would not be like that. My father always said, "Malala will be as free as a bird." I dreamed of going to the top of Mount Elam, like Alexander the Great, to touch Jupiter, and even beyond the valley. But as I watched my brothers running across the roof, flying their kites and skillfully flicking the strings back and forth to cut each other's down, I wondered how free a daughter could ever be. I read The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. Every character in this play is revealed to be leading a hypocritical double life. This play is just comical in its script alone. It's also really entertaining. Oscar Wilde is brilliant with wordplay. When all the stock characters came together, it made for a really interesting scene. I gave it 4 stars. Paper Towns by John Green. When Margot Roth climbs through Quentin Jacobson's window to summon him on an all-night road trip of revenge, he cannot help but follow. But the next morning Margot isn't at school. She's left clues to her disappearance, and it's up for Quentin to follow them, and perhaps discover who the real Margot is. I didn't particularly love any of these characters. They all seemed quite entitled. My favourite parts of this book were the 2 road trips, the one at the beginning with Margot, and the one at the end with Quentin's other friends. I gave it 3.5 stars in the end. The Magnus Chase Trilogy by Rick Riordan. The first book in this trilogy is Magnus Chase and the Sword of Summer. Magnus' long-lost father is a Norse god, and Magnus has to find the sword his father lost over 200 years ago, or there will be doom. But first, he's going to die. All I have to say about this book is that Norse mythology is less reassuring than Greek mythology. 3.5 stars. Magnus Chase and the Hammer of Thor. Magnus is on a quest in search of Thor's missing hammer, but the giants keep getting in his way. If Magnus can't find it, they'll ravage the 9 worlds, starting with Magnus's home, the streets of Boston. The only person who can help? Loki. I gave this book 4 stars. Magnus Chase and the Ship of the Dead. With the help of familiar faces, Magnus must find a magic elixir. I gave this book 5 stars. Rick Riordan is brilliant at making lovable and unique characters. All the talk of Ragnarok made me feel a bit anxious, however, it was also interesting. Magnus is a pretty fun character, and I love his bond with Blitz and Hearth. This story was funny, heartwarming, and emotional, and the constant introduction of new characters makes it really interesting. Overall, it has so many peaks and valleys, but it's ultimately a really enjoyable read, with a brilliant ending. Lorelei by Laura Dockrell. When Rory finds a girl sheltering under the pier, his life is turned upside down. Lorelei is on the run from somewhere Rory can't even guess at. Weird things happen as Rory and Lorelei evade sea monsters, pirates, and feckless friends. Is falling in love always this strange? Although the plot of this book felt somewhat lacking in character development, the story itself is a very enjoyable read. I particularly enjoyed the moments the sea would narrate. This was such an interesting perspective. I was not convinced of the love between Rory and Lorelei because they have only known each other for a couple of days. But the world it is set in, with the merds and pirates and sea monsters, was all very interesting. 4 stars. I have never seen stars before. I know these are not real stars because we are inside a house, and I know of houses because Opal told us. She told us about grass and roads and shops. It's not all about telling, some is about reminding. Some of them I remember scraps here and there, but Opal knows the most. Opal taught us about animals, and religion, which is so confusing. You cannot hold religion, and dreams, and insects. All those legs. Why does anything need so many legs? She told us about graveyards and clouds and nightclubs, and the cinema, but not the swimming pool, strangely. But of all these things, the stars were the one thing I wanted to see the most. The one thing I couldn't get my head around. Some of the others were allowed to go up, but I wasn't. I was too precious, too treasured, they said. When really I think I was just sheltered. They didn't want me to know the truth. I read Twelfth Night by William Shakespeare. After Viola is separated from her twin brother after a shipwreck, she disguises herself as a boy to serve on Duke Orsino's court. As Cesario, her job is to woo the Countess on his behalf. But the Countess shows affection for Cesario, and Viola secretly harbours a love for Orsino. To read the play alone, it does not appear so interesting, but to watch the play, it becomes so much better. You can see the comedy being acted, see stage directions bring scenes to life. The script is certainly possessing of comedy, and the characters work together to create a really entertaining play. In the end, I did give it 2.5 stars. Next up, I read The Body by Stephen King. I first read this book after watching Stand By Me, the adaptation, because I loved it so much. When I realised it was based off of Stephen King's The Body, I just had to read it. So this book is about 12-year-old Gladien and his 3 friends who set out on a quest to find the missing body of a boy from a nearby town who has disappeared. They follow the railway tracks, retracing the boy's steps, on a miserably hot summer's day. Along their journey, they learn that monsters are not lurking in closets, but are in the hearts of people. I loved this book. The narration was brilliant, and it's a story that focuses on childhood, friendships, and boyhood. It was heartwarming, heartbreaking, bittersweet, and honest. It's a beautiful read, and I can't help but care for Gladien and his 3 friends. I gave it 5 stars. The most important things are the hardest things to say. They are the things you get ashamed of because words diminish them. Words shrink things that seem limitless when they were in your head to no more than living size when they are brought out. But it's more than that, isn't it? The most important things lie too close to wherever your secret heart is buried, like landmarks to a treasure your enemies would love to steal away. And you may make revelations that cost you dearly, only to have people look at you in a funny way, not understanding what you've said at all, or why you thought it was so important that you almost cried while you were saying it. That's the worst, I think, when a secret stays locked within, not for want of a teller, but for want of an understanding ear. I was 12 going on 13 when I first saw a dead human being. It happened in 1960, a long time ago, although sometimes it doesn't seem that long to me, especially on the nights I wake up from dreams where the hail falls into his open eyes. Next up is The Hand, the Eye, and the Heart by Zoe Marriott. Zillion was assigned female at birth. They are destined to live out their life within the woman's quarter. But when civil war strikes the Empire, Zillion is determined to save their disabled father from the battlefield by taking his place. Surviving brutal army training as a boy, Z is the first challenge. In the court of the Land of Dragons, love and betrayal are 2 sides of the same smile. Soon the fate of a nation rests on Z's shoulders. But to win, they must decide where their heart truly belongs. I love this book. It is definitely one of my favourites from the whole year. It is so interesting and gripping. Hua Zi is an amazing character and I adore them. I love their relationship with the other characters too. The plot was amazing and well paced. The twists were shocking, stressful, and brilliant. I loved seeing so much character growth throughout the book. I gave it 5 stars. There is a content warning for dead naming, misgendering, and depictions of unsafe chest binding. Next up, I read Rupi Kaur's poetry collection, The Sun and Her Flowers. This is a collection of poems that talk of what it is to fall apart and then bloom again. The Sun and Her Flowers is a collection of poetry about grief, self-abandonment, honouring one's roots, love, and empowering oneself. It is split into 5 chapters: wilting, falling, rooting, rising, and blooming. Some of these poems had beautifully written lines, and there is definitely an important meaning to each piece in the collection. However, the writing style didn't really interest me. I gave this book 2 stars. Next up, I read Alice Oseman's novella, This Winter. This is about Tori, Charlie, and Oliver Spring, who are all trying to get through Christmas Day with minimum drama. For Oliver, this means Mario Kart with his siblings, but for Tori and Charlie, it means putting the past few months behind them. I love anything Alice writes because her characters are so dear to me. I love seeing more of Charlie and Tori's bond. I can understand it's a novella, but I was still somewhat upset by how it felt lacking in plot. Nonetheless, I really enjoyed reading it. 2.5 stars. I'm going to give trigger warnings to this book for discussions of mental illness, descriptions of disordered eating, references to self-harm, and ignorant views regarding mental illness. Another novella by Alice Oseman, Nick and Charlie. Everyone knows that Nick and Charlie are the perfect couple. They're inseparable, but Nick is soon leaving for university, and Charlie will be left behind at sixth form. As time to say goodbye draws closer, both boys begin to question if their love is strong enough to survive being apart. This novella was really sweet. I actually loved Nick and Charlie's big fight in the aftermath of that. They are such mature people, and I think they provide a fairly good example of what couples should be like, and how valuable communication can be. I gave it 4 stars. The Walking Dead by Robert Kirkman and Charlie Adlard. Okay, so in 2023 I completed reading all of the Walking Dead graphic novels. I read these in the compendium version, so I read compendium 1 to 4. And if you're not so fussed about collecting the individual comics, you just want to read them, I recommend this is the way you do it. I think it turns out kind of being the same price, but It is so much more easier than having to hunt and source all of the individual comics. A bit of a synopsis of The Walking Dead. The world we knew is gone, replaced by a world of survival and responsibility. An epidemic of apocalyptic proportions has swept the globe, causing the dead to rise and feed on the living. In a matter of months, society has crumbled. No government, no grocery stores, no mail delivery, and no cable TV. In a world ruled by the dead, we are forced to start living. So I read the Walking Dead comics through the 4 compendiums, and I started my obsession with the Walking Dead after watching the show. And while the comics differed quite vastly, I still loved them. It brought new characters and storylines. The gore and brutality was intense but also exciting and gripping. There is also humour dotted throughout. There are certainly difficult, upsetting and triggering moments, and I can't say all of them are dealt with well, but most of them are. The art style is amazing, and I recommend this graphic novel series to all fans of The Walking Dead show and people who like gore and violence in the apocalyptic world. So Compendium 1 I gave 5 stars. It's a brilliant introduction to the world of The Walking Dead. Compendium 2 I gave 4 stars. It kind of shows that it's possible to establish a strong community in this world after all. Compendium 3 I gave 5 stars. There's some brilliant villains introduced. And Compendium 4 I gave 4 stars. The ending was satisfying, but also kind of disappointing. It's a hit or miss, really. Okay, next up I read Killjoy, the prequel to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. Pip is not looking forward to her friend's 1920s themed murder mystery party. But when the game begins, she is hooked by the make-believe world, intrigue, deception and murder. Pip plays detective, teasing out the identity of the killer clue by clue. But the murder of fictional Reginald Remy isn't the only case on her mind. This is such a fun prequel to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, showing how Pip's passion for playing detective came about. I enjoyed the clues and parallels between this and A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and I also really appreciated seeing more of the friend group dynamic. 4 stars. Okay, next up I read much anticipated Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Chalice of the Gods by Rick Riordan. This book lived up to its expectations. Percy Jackson just wants a regular year at school, but the gods have other plans. For Percy to secure a place at the University of New Rome, he must get 3 recommendation letters from 3 different gods. But the gods will only be so kind as long as Percy completes a task. His first challenge: to receive a letter of recommendation from cupbearer Ganymede, Percy must find the magical chalice before it falls into the wrong hands. I loved this book. Seeing the original trio together again made me so happy. The story was fun and the plot moved smoothly. I liked meeting more gods and figures from Greek mythology. I gave it 5 stars. Next up, I read the His Dark Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman. The first book in this series, Northern Lights, follows Lyra when her best friend Roger disappears. She and her demon Pantalaimon determine to find him. Their quest leads them to the north, where armored bears rule and witch queens fly, and where a team of scientists conduct experiments too horrible to speak of. I gave this book 4.5 stars. The Subtle Knife is about Will. He's just killed a man and now he's on the run. He steps through a window and finds himself in a new world. Here he meets a girl called Lyra and her strange companion. This new world is strange and unsettling, and to survive, Will must seek out a precious object, the Subtle Knife. I gave this book 3 stars. It definitely felt like a lot slower paced than the others, and I think it kind of just didn't draw me in as much. To conclude this series, we have the Amber Spyglass. Will is on a mission to rescue his friend with a company of angels. The worlds are gearing for war. I gave this book 5 stars. This series has brilliant moments and rather dull moments. The first book is a brilliant introduction to Lyra's world. I love the concept of demons. The prophecy spoken of is interesting, and to watch it unfold over the course of the series is fascinating. Often I thought Lyra lacked some of the key parts of her character. In the beginning, she showed herself to have quite a lot of childlike attributes, but later on she often showed a lack of emotion to deeply upsetting things. And I think the introduction of Will changed her character's personality a lot. She became a lot less independent. The final book was my favourite. It was fast-paced and packed with intrigue, and no aspect of the story felt particularly neglected. Most of the characters are lovable, and every single character is greatly complex. Okay, next up I read the Iliad by Homer. I literally started this book in June and finished it in December. So this is Homer's The Iliad, translated by Robert Fagles. It's an epic poem that recounts the events of the agonizingly long Trojan War. There were many times I struggled to keep my eyes open while reading this, but the epic wasn't completely lacking in entertainment. While at times the writing and poem itself felt repetitive and dull, there were also many moments when Homer's writing hooked me. It's beautiful and powerful. I gave it 3.5 stars. Next up is the Heartstopper series by Alice Oseman. So this is a graphic novel series with 5 volumes. The 5th one came out in December. Over the course of the year, I probably reread volume 1 to 4 about 2 times. To give a brief summary, boy meets boy, boys become friends, boys fall in love, but what happens next? So volume 1 to volume 5 tell the story of Nick and Charlie, how they came to be Nick and Charlie, and the struggles they face. Alice Oseman's sensitivity, knowledge and wisdom is so valuable. These graphic novels are emotional, heartwarming and beautiful. I give volume 1 4 stars. It's heartwarming. Nick and Charlie come to terms with their feeling for one another. I give volume 2 5 stars. It's beautiful. It's not unknown that coming out is hard, but why does it have to feel that way? Volume 3 got 5 stars. There's great development in this book. Nick and Charlie and their friends go to Paris, where secrets start to emerge. I gave volume 4 4 stars. It focuses on Charlie's mental health and Nick's anxiety for him. And volume 5 got 5 stars. It's really emotional. Nick's getting ready to choose a uni, but neither of the boys know if they could cope with being long distance. Overall, a brilliant series, and I think it's a valuable read for many, many people. Okay, the last book I read in 2023 was Ghost Boys by Jewel Parker Rhodes. This book is about 12-year-old Jerome, who doesn't ever get into trouble. He goes to school, does his homework, takes care of his little sister. He follows the rules. But then Jerome is shot by a police officer, who mistakes his toy gun for a real threat. As a ghost, Jerome watches his family trying to cope with his death. He attends court, visits his own grave. But Jerome begins to notice other ghost boys, and even gets noticed by the living daughter of the policeman who shot him. Every ghost boy has a story. They all have something in common. Bit by bit, Jerome begins to understand what really happened, not just to him, but to all the ghost boys. This book tackles such important topics, particularly race and social bias. Drawing on true events of the past, it packs a punch, and the message is so deeply valuable. I believe this is a book everyone should read. It is catered towards children and schools, and it is a story to be shared. I gave it 4 stars. So that is the end of my What I Read in 2023 video. I hope you enjoyed it. As I said before, comment any questions you have below, or if you just want to talk about books, if you've read any of these books, let me know. I just want to say that these are just my opinions. I don't take book reviewing so seriously, I just do it so I remember what I've read and remember how it makes me feel. That's the main thing. I base my book reviews on how they make me feel. So if I'm rating books, it's normally a rating for how much I enjoy reading them, how much I find them impacting me. It's not like an analytical review into the writing style. Basically, my book reviews, my star scale, just goes off of how much I love the book for various different reasons. I really wouldn't take it too seriously. I just kind of wanted to share what I've read this year and kind of maybe hopefully give you guys some inspiration of what you want to read in the following years. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll see you next time.